As we continue to reflect on climate change, more especially climate finance, to discuss what role the country is playing in the G20 Environment and Climate Sustainability Working Group currently underway in Mpumalanga, South Africa, and how South Africa is engaging on matters of climate finance, access and equity. We're now joined by Dr. Dion George, Minister of Environment, Forestry and Fisheries. Minister, very good afternoon to you and thank you so much for your time. So South Africa is playing a very key role currently in the G20 Environment and Climate Sustainability Working Group. What leverage, if any, especially now during the G20 presidency, does the country realistically have to push for fairer and more accessible climate financing mechanisms, particularly for adaptation?
Well, I think one thing that's quite clear is that South Africa is the president of the G20 at a very difficult time in the world. We see that there's a lot of conflict across the world. We've also seen some countries that have withdrawn from the Paris Agreement, etc. So it is difficult times. And last year at Baku, there were agreements made on finance for climate mitigation and adaptation. Now, of course, the big question is are we going to actually get the money that we were anticipating to get? So these are questions that need to be asked, and these are things that are under discussion at the moment. Very specifically, South Africa does have one of the streams for the G20 is the cost of capital, because it is so that we as South Africa and other African nations in particular and other global South countries, that we do pay more for money that we borrow. And we do need to finance the climate resilient infrastructure that we need. And also we need finance for the just energy transition, because obviously we want to move as fast as we can. But of course, we have got complexities of a growing, developing economy country. So these are complexities that need to be balanced. So as the president of the G20, we've brought these factors to the fore. And I think that's showing a lot of progress already, because at the meeting at Kruger National Park, where we're having our second technical meeting, we have been discussing specific matters relating to the climate part, because there are 6 key objectives that we have out of this G20 meeting and set of meetings. The next lot are going to be in Cape Town, specifically for climate and sustainability for my Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment. So we've set some very clear objectives. And the one of them, obviously, is also to make sure that if we're going to be ambitious in our action towards mitigating and adapting to climate change, we need to make sure that we can actually get the finance for it. But there's a lot else that's also going on, specifically in biodiversity and conservation. And that was one of the things that we've highlighted it now in Kruger.
I'll come to that in a moment, Minister, but just from what you're saying, so from a South African perspective, how concerned should we really be about this funding gap? I mean, can the G20 countries be persuaded to fulfill their obligations as we've discussed now? I mean, what is promised doesn't match what is paid. Would you also support maybe a stronger tracking and enforcement mechanisms here, perhaps even within these multilateral institutions, just to ensure the financing commitments are actually met?
Well, you see, the thing is that the Paris Agreement aimed really was for all the nations of the world to get together, to work together on this existential threat that is climate change. Now, what we have seen over time is that the promises on finance have not actually turned into reality. And that South Africa has always been very mindful about. Because what we've been saying is that we're going to have to move as fast as we possibly can, but within the constraints that we have. And we've had a lot of support from other nations across the world to support us in our just energy transition. But we are in very uncertain times. So what we've seen in Europe, for example, their electorates have moved to the right. So they've got less of an appetite to support other countries in the world. Also, we've seen the United States of America withdrawing from the Paris Agreement. So it is so that we are now operating in a very different environment. But the one thing that is very clear, and South Africa has made it very clear, is that we do remain focused on those promises that we have made. So, for example, at this very moment, we're working on our nationally determined contributions that we are going to be pursuing and discussing at the United Nations in September, and then also at COP in Brazil is that we are clear in terms of the direction we want to go. We do want to move towards reducing our carbon footprint, but at the same time within the constraints we have. And we do know, obviously, that our fisc is very, very constrained. And if we do not get support from elsewhere, we are going to have a much slower transition. But on the upside is that those nations that have made promises to us, specifically for concessional finance, are still very much at the table. It now is all about how we harness that. So how do we actually roll out all the programs that we have, for example, on our transmission lines, etc. So obviously, Minister Ramaphosa, Energy and Electricity, is very animated by that. And of course, we work very closely together to make sure that we can smooth out the environmental matters. So if we want to speed up with, for example, building more transmission lines, that we can actually get that process moving faster. And we're working very well on those. So South Africa, amongst all the noise in the world, is absolutely focused on the things that we have to do, because also, as a sensible nation and as one of the leading voices in this very troubled times in the world, many nations look to us for leadership, to say, well, yes, we are the president of the G20, and yes, the complexities are in the world, but we are keeping things on track. We are still talking, we are still managing the narrative in the right direction.
And I think for many South Africans, we want to see how that is going to ultimately play out at that Leaders Summit in November. But just going back to your comments around biodiversity, we know, of course, that South Africa has an enormous biodiversity, far more than most countries, in fact. So when you factor in the Environmental Climate Sustainability Working Group, biodiversity is one of the priorities. So what can we then expect from the G20, I mean, in terms of specific actions and plans to be forthcoming? Speak to us about this, and of course how the recently launched Rhino Renaissance campaign fits in all of this.
Yes, well, the Rhino Renaissance plan really is to get our white rhino population to improve. It is moving in the right direction, but we know that the species almost went extinct. The numbers went down to 100. They're now in the region of around 2,000. And the Renaissance program aims to get the white rhino population up to 12,000 within the foreseeable future. So those are specific concrete things that we are doing, and it means that we need to collaborate. Obviously, we work with the conservation entities, we also work with business, and we work with various people that we can collaborate with, because we can't do this all on our own. And also, very importantly, is to get local communities involved, because when communities feel part of the natural environment, they feel that the natural assets also belong to them, then they will also protect them. So a big piece on the Renaissance action program is to counter illicit wildlife trafficking. Now, we know this is a scourge in South Africa. It's not only rhino horn, it's also abalone, it's plants, it's pangolins. And so we are working towards an agreement that will come out of the G20 as part of the ministerial declaration that will happen in October, where we've already agreed that we want to work together to counter the scourge of poaching, but more concrete action, because that is how we're going to sort out this problem. So one of the leading lights here for our G20 is that we've got very much onto the agenda this issue of the illicit wildlife trafficking, the fact that we must work together collaboratively. And as the world is shifting, this is still an international criminal syndicate problem, which we're aware of. It's now that we need to act on it. And we have got a number of initiatives on the go. We've also got SAMLIT, which is the financial piece, which looks at the illicit financial flows. And so we've elevated it now in the G20. So we believe that we'll have a declaration that will declare our interest, and then also obviously our intentions, to make sure that we can then act on it, because talking is just talking. You want action, and that's what South Africa is focused on. And we are leading that charge in the world.
And that's where we have to leave it. Minister, thank you so much, though, for your time. Really do appreciate it. Dr. Dion George, Minister of Environment, Forestry and Fisheries. Well, that's the wrap of this segment. We'll continue, of course, to focus on the G20 by bringing in various guests as we look at the various working groups ahead of the summit in November. As, of course, you've heard from the Minister, South Africa is the G20 presidency, also amid a lot of uncertainty and also global geopolitics. But we'll continue to unpack all the relevant discussion points in this segment.